What's up, everybody, and welcome to another Ask Me Anything. Again, this is just a place to ask your questions, and I do my best to answer them. What qualifies me as a person to answer these questions about unschooling, parenting, all that life in between? I'm a certified teacher. I'm a practitioner of unschooling for the past 7 years. Um, I'm a writer of kind of all things unschooling. I'm an advisor for a self-directed education organization, Mosaic. I'm a parenting slash unschooling coach, and I'm a homeschool evaluator and PA. But above all, I am kind of a deep thinker, and I just really enjoy education, youth empowerment, facilitation, et cetera, consent. Yeah, so I'm not an expert. I just have life experience. I've helped a lot of people, and hopefully, some of the things I say can help you too. But I'm gonna preface, not everything I say is gonna help you. So, you know, take what works for you and leave what doesn't. Um, if this is not the right format for you and you need something that's more one-on-one, feel free to reach out. Um, but yeah, I say let's get right into it. So today, the question, which is a super popular question, scroll down to it. How to start on schooling? How does the curriculum work? And this might feel like, kind of I don't know, a weird question, but it's one that is on a lot of people's minds, a lot of parents' minds, especially when you're coming from either from school where there is a curriculum and there is a set schedule, um, or you're coming from kind of school at home, like more homeschool, and you're transitioning um, to unschooling, or you're, kind of keeping that in mind as a goal. Um, yeah, like what is the curriculum? What's the rhythm? What's it look like? What's the schedule? How do you cover stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I would just want to say that parents getting into unschooling often look for a planned out kind of guide to follow. Because what people think of as unschooling is like chaos. It's anything goes. And that's really disconcerting. Even if they trust the process or they feel completely on board, or, they see how it works for other people. So they try to, and this is smart, they define what it is and then try that, right? And I think in many ways I did this as well. Like, what is unschooling? I'm on board. Let's try it. What happens a lot of the times, probably most of, maybe most of the time, maybe half the time, is that people, families, often mothers, are like, let's try this unschooling dynamic. I hear a lot about it. My friends talk about it. I've heard a podcast about it. Let's try it. And then they try it in the way that they define it, or the way it has been defined to them, and it's not individualized. That definition is very rigid, and purposely so, because it's like, well, let's stick to it and see if it works. The problem is, if you think that definition is the only definition of unschooling and it doesn't work for your family, then something else, you got to go to something else. And usually what that means is heading back, regressing to school at home or school or something else, micro school, or uh, um, charter school, or uh, Montessori, or I don't know. There's so many possibilities in there, even like online school. And not to say that any of those are bad, but what the part that is bad is defining some things, finding that it doesn't work, and then turning back without looking for more possibility. Because the unschooling, like I like to call it a spectrum, or even like a matrix of like just all possibilities, whether you're like kind of on one side, like that radical unschooling, which again kind of gets its own very narrow definition. And I was just having a conversation about that this morning. Um, all the way down to like relaxed homeschoolers. And I think all of that is part of the unschool spectrum. And I give you license to call yourself an unschooler if it fits you anywhere in there. Like I think you're all welcome. There's not one definition of how unschooling works or what needs to happen for it to be considered unschooling, self-directed education. I think um and I say that in a sense that in the past, historically, what I've seen is too much of gatekeeping, too much of unschooling is only this. So let's push away the people that are trying it out and aren't doing it right and stuff like that, which I think is terrible to the movement in general. So I welcome you wherever you are. And I think this is something that's awesome about Mosaic as well. The nonprofit organization that I work for, it's like wherever you are, come and you don't have to get somewhere. Like tell us what your values are and we'll try to help you get there. All right, I'm going a little off the rails here, but yeah, parents are often looking for a planned out guide to follow because life is very planned out. Like if you have a job, you have to do what is, the description of that job. It's much different if you're like an entrepreneur or you're self-employed, you're doing your own stuff, then you don't have like this somebody else's strict guide to follow. And so ditto that for school, like, K to 12 and then college. And sure, you get to like pick your classes, but you don't get to pick what the classes look like. You get to pick how you interact with them, but then that affects your grade as well. Um, and life, I've said this before, but like life as an adult for most people has a level of self-direction that we don't see in conventional childhood. So adults are very used to consent, which it's not even on their minds for a lot of people. The idea that they should consent to what's happening. And I know, again, depending on your workplace, that might be a true area, but like being able to drive, being able to drink, being able to spend your money in certain ways or a certain amount of your money in certain ways, deciding what you eat. And these are different for children. Um, yeah, unschooling is different from most conventional forms of education because it is our young people and our family that are our guide. Young people and family, that family thing is super important because I feel like sometimes when people are like, children have no rights, let's do unschooling and maybe radical unschooling is the answer. And again, not to categorize any part of the unschooling, but sometimes what it looks like or much to the detriment of the whole family is like kids reign. So you go from kids having no power to kids having all of the power. And I don't think either of those dynamics is good. Um, so power sharing, listening to our young people and then using that data to inform family decisions that you've decided as a family. Um, and trusting young people in different ways, right? Too. So the question is how to start unschooling. What does the curriculum look like? How does it work? And my question is, what are your young people interested in? Start there. Don't think about how this has to look or what's the rigid schedule. Don't get me wrong. I think some families do really well, and some individuals, young people, do really well with a schedule and sometimes a very rigid schedule. But to start to transform that schedule into something that works for them or based on their interests, something that feels a lot more consensual to them. So what are they interested in? How can you follow them? How can you build a list of all of the things that they're interested in, depending on the age of your child and, is screen time a possibility? What are the activities that are possible in the house, in and around the house, in and around the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. You can build a list of um, things to do, like the board list, and I'm pulling out ours that we haven't used in such a long time. Um, it says board at the top. And this was awesome for me having to work at home and my son who was like, Dad, I'm bored. And I'm like, okay, it's okay to be bored. And that's a good thing to be bored. But at the same time, I wanted to still be the facilitator of like what's next. Because if I ask my son, what are you interested in? And I, even without asking him, can pick up all the little things that he is interested in and I write it down, then guess what? He comes to me and says, I'm bored. I'm like, hey, go check out, the board notebook and see if there's something that sticks out to you. And so I'll just read a couple. And again, this is dated because for a couple reasons, like we don't really use this much anymore. And I think one of the main and the important reason to discuss here is that once you get an idea of what to do when you're bored, you don't always have to keep going back to like, what do I do to fill this space? But it's always good to check in. And I think this actually, now that I bring it out, I'm like, this might be fun again to look into like, are some of these applicable? Are some of these things that we haven't done in like 2, 3 years? It's almost like a little time capsule. So I separated my board list into like inside, research resources, different screen time things, outside. And then I was just keeping track of general interests. And that actually flowed over into our podcast that we were doing. But like, so for example, inside, and today is a perfect example. It's pretty hot outside today, and we have smoke from the Canadian wildfires. So it's like inside, we have to do inside. Um, so being read to, podcast research, gymnastics, which may or may not work in your house, obstacle course, which may or may not work in your house, snap circuits, which I think we've given away at this point, yoga, a puzzle, playing drums, playing guitar, playing piano. We have a keyboard, like kind of piano, listening to music, taking pictures, cooking food, doing a hangman, spelling words, digital microscope. It's funny, I'm seeing some of like my older schoolish tendencies in here. Taking apart something, making a robot, Legos or blocks, woodworking, soccer, typing a story, experiments, writing an email, drawing, clay, paint, making a fort. And again, this is individualized to my son. Like there's a bunch more, but I'll stop. This is individualized to my son, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So we're talking, my son just turned 13 today, so happy birthday, Kai. Um, so we're talking like 8, 8 or 9. But your child might be 15, your child might be 6. So, and your child's going to be probably much different than my child. Um, so what interests them? How can you facilitate, diving deeper into those topics and activities? For us, it was like a podcast, but it was also just general conversations. Um, and then rabbit holes of like, what is this? What are tardigrades? What do you mean there's a black hole that's bigger than our solar system? It's like crazy stuff like that. That's really fun to get into. And as a parent that had time and was curious, I would definitely go on those journeys with him. I think we moved to a little bit of a different dynamic where my son is largely doing more of the self-direction. But I'm still there to be like, help out when I can and where I can. Um, can we achieve this all in a family of sometimes diverse members with different needs? So again, this goes back to it is our young people and our family that are our guide. So if one young person in our family really wants to do this thing, can we access that some of the times because it negatively affects the other members of the family, or they have different needs, or they want to do different things. So it's like sometimes, and then how to balance that out and think about equity, et cetera, equality. Um, yeah. Questions aren't always helpful at this stage. I know I just threw a bunch of questions at you, but I can provide you with the closest thing Mosaic has to a curriculum. Again, I'm not like I work with Mosaic, but I'm not like paid by them to advertise outside of Mosaic, et cetera, et cetera. But like I've said before, this is where my mind is because it's the community that I'm in mostly, um, in terms of parenting, self-direction, et cetera. And I've done a lot of work with them. So I worked with my friend and colleague and guide, if you will, in the Mosaic space on the Uncurriculum Workbook. And this book was built exactly for parents in your position. It's generally a how to unschool guide, which sounds crazy, right? Because there is no how to unschool, but it's basically a book that says, hey, um, we are going to help you reach your values. Okay. And it is going to take a lot of questions, going to take some of your work, but it's basically set up like a curriculum for parents. It's got units, it's got lessons, it's got homework and extra credit, and all those kind of snarky bits that don't really seem to fit in the unschooling world. But parents that are new to unschooling, that's comfortable, right? That like, okay, well, let's get to the next lesson. Um, and you can use the book however you want, the workbook. You can jump around. And we have monthly virtual meetings where we explore one of the lessons. Um, and yeah, feel free to join our calls. It's very open, non-judgmental. You don't need to prep at all for the calls. And Mosaic does offer a 60-day free trial. So you could try it out for 60 days. You would get the Uncurriculum Workbook. You would always have it. And even if you were like, okay, maybe Mosaic's not for me, you still have this pretty cool resource that you get to go through. Um, but I really do enjoy the community aspect of it, the monthly meetings and the check-ins and the questions that we bring up in community. Um, because you start to see things in people that you didn't realize were in yourself, and you start to see possibilities in other people's stories that you never thought of. And like just together we're stronger kind of a mentality. It's just awesome. Okay, I'll stop gushing over, tooting my own horn over the Uncurriculum Workbook and gushing over Mosaic. But check them out again, free. Why not? Why not just check it out, right? So I'll include a link to that, the workbook, and Mosaic. Okay, I want to say that it is especially complicated when you are already homeschooling. We're talking about transitioning from adult ownership, control over curriculum, content, pace, expectations from that dynamic, not just like a teacher, we've outsourced this to a teacher, but the parent is living that. And we're transitioning from that to partnership. And that's sharing power or power with. That's guidance from an adult caregiver, parent, facilitator. And that guidance comes from experience. It's not final, it's not the requirement. It recognizes that young people are humans too, with ideas, motivations, failures, concerns, interests, rhythms, etc. There's equity in decision making, there's consent. Um, and then if this is really working well, if you've, lived into this a little bit, you felt into this and it's working well, consider leaning more into, okay, yeah, we have a handle on unschooling, at least the preliminary parts of it. Consider leaning into youth agency, autonomy, and and the idea that radical unschooling looks like this. I think that's like the stereotype, if you will. This works more of the youth agency, more autonomy does work for some self-starter individuals. It depends on the adult concerns, the adult expectations. Ditto that for the young person. It depends on the adult person's baggage and worldview, and to some extent, ditto that for the young person. And this isn't necessarily preferable. Unschooling isn't a monolith. It's not just one way. There's not the best way. I don't think unschooling works for all families. I think the spectrum is super wide, and I think most families can find some place along there. Um, that works for them in a certain way, right? And that's not static either. Like that things change. Like, sometimes unschoolers go to school and et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, because of the circumstances, whether it's an emergency or whether, life circumstances change, like you're moving, you're changing states, you're changing countries. Some of this stuff has to change. And I've seen plenty of families that go through that, like, hey, we're 100% for the unschooling life. We're running an unschooling center. We have to move to a different country now, and that's not legal anymore. Or the only way that works for my family at this point is being at a center or being at school. And what does that mean? So, feelings of grief and the opposite joy, right? Like that kind of not antithesis, but like the overlapping of joy. And maybe what I'll do here is I'm sure I've said this before, but the Aquila and Thea talk on grief and joy, which is, by the way, free. Highly recommend it if I haven't recommended it before. So let me just write that. But I think the same is true also for families that want to be 100% unschooling but can't at this point. Like they're starting off, like we would love to dive into unschooling. Um, but at this point, it's just not sustainable. It doesn't work for our capacity, whether that's financial, whether that's a time thing, whether, there's just not enough families around, the community isn't there. Um, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so then going back, if, right, sharing power with guidance from, the adult person comes from experience, equity, consent, et cetera. If that isn't working, then what you can do, oh, I'm sorry. That's not what I meant. If that more of a free vibe of, youth agency and autonomy isn't working, then you can always lean back towards that original thing, like the partnership. Keep the conversation alive and really listen to your young people. Request feedback, and feel it out together. And I also say what's really important is to name your fears and concerns, like even in front of your young people, but also state your intentions to stay curious and open. Um, yeah, I mean, again, like I said, like I can't give you a guide, but I can give you a literal Uncurriculum workbook that is kind of a guide. And it is not individualized for your family, but the questions go like help you individualize it for your family. What's it going to look like? What are your values? What are your young people like? Are they neurodivergent? What are their ages? What are they looking for? Um, what works for everyone at the same time? What doesn't work for everyone? Where do you find sites of mutual fulfillment? Et cetera, all to make it sustainable and work for you. Um, so now I'll just list a bunch of resources because I don't like as much as the Uncurriculum workbook exists. I don't think there's just like a perfect manual to help you dive right in. Um, and like answering this question, I can't just hand over a manual without their work being done. But I think that what's really important as well to add to this is a mindset. And like I said, openness, curiosity, listening, observing, letting things marinate, keeping anxieties in check and feeling out the uncertainty at the same time. So I think for me, podcasts that really stand out on this whole topic again, how to start unschooling, how does the curriculum work? Um, Podcasts that work well for answering this question are fair the free child, and I'm going to say that this might feel out there, but it will give you a lot of questions to marinate on and start from the beginning. Just feel it out, okay? And if it's not working for you, leave it and then come back to it. There's also unschooling, I'm sorry, exploring unschooling. That's with Pamela Riccia and the other lady that's on that, I think now. And that is just like such a long, they're at like 350 episodes. Um, Fair, the Free Child is by Akila Richards. It's purposely like kind of BIPOC centered, but I think it is still widely applicable. But that lens you won't necessarily get in exploring unschooling. I think also the Unschool Space by Esther Jones is good for stories. It gives like stories, so it puts some humanity behind like what is possible, what things can look like, what are people's specific circumstances and how have they dealt with them. And I think it's the stories that help us change. Uh, being able to see ourselves in something or see the possibility in something. And then there's also a deschooling podcast. It might be called like Deschooling Yourselves or something, but I'll add that into the YouTube description. And then to name off books, I do have a flow chart for SDE books, so it's kind of like, are you just getting out of school, or are you looking to deep dive into the academic level reading, or are you more focused on parenting, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll include that, but all the books that I would name off of that are applicable here, that are highly applicable here are Akila Richards' Raising Free People, Blake Bowles' Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? That is a great comprehensive one. The Raising Free People one is a good one because Akila Richards tells stories of her life and how it led her into kind of liberation. Um, so it's like it's almost like reading a fiction book and then being like surprised at the outcomes. You're like, oh crap, I'm learning some really deep stuff. The Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School is by Blake Bowles is so wide, so comprehensive, and still feels like pretty factually true. And then the Book of Learning and Forgetting by Frank Smith, which is just, again, another kind of mindset shifter that helps you just recognize how young people, well, how humans do learn. Because school does not equal education, school does not equal learning, necessarily. And I think when we think of education, when we think of learning, we think of school. And so we're just using this narrow definition of how learning can look like. Um, but the Book of Learning and Forgetting kind of blows that all apart. And I love that book. Yeah. Okay. I think that's what I have. I wonder if any of you out there have anything to add and for like how to start unschooling, or even just a story of how you started unschooling. That would be so cool to share and hear from a bunch of other people, a bunch of other families in terms of, even if some of my recommendations like absolutely didn't work for you or wouldn't have worked for you or did or would have if you had thought about it or learned about it or, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, let's make this a conversation. Um, yeah, and so I think at this point I have like one question left. So if I don't get any more questions, then I'm gonna stop for a while. So I think that again, the next call that I'll have will be next Thursday. And at this point, if I don't get any more questions, that'll be it. And if that's okay, I mean, if that happens, then I guess that's cool too. All right. See you all around.